Hey guys, it's Multiplier. We're with Splice today, and we're going to have a look at warping, and specifically we're going to look at the basics of warping, and we're going to look at warping loops or tracks with a fixed or known BPM. And it's worth noting that I'm going to share this project through Splice. I'm going to give you some examples to try yourself, some before and afters. So if you want to take what you've learned from this video and try it yourself, have a look at the link below to download the project file from Splice. So warping. What is warping? Well, warping is an Ableton thing where you take your audio and you stretch it to fit in with the grid of the track. So you may have noticed that in Ableton, everything happens, although there is a timeline in seconds floating around along the bottom, everything pretty much happens on the grid. So we have everything in beats and bars and divisions. So what we need to do is if we have a track or a loop at a fixed or known BPM, we might need to stretch it so that it fits in with our grid. So for example, what we're going to do, we're going to take one of my tracks called Voices and we're going to stretch it to fit in with a different tempo or a different speed. So we'll drag out Voices from the hard drive, which is the track. We'll just drag it out into arrangement view. And then we need to make sure we have this audio editor warping thing up. So I need to make sure the bottom right arrow thing is triggered up, so make sure that's open. And then now we have a look in the bottom left, and this is where the warping happens. So if we turn on warping just by clicking the warp button, I'll show you roughly how it works. So we'll turn it on, and then if we zoom in, so just get our mouse over the numbers bit so it looks a little bit like that. Click and drag down. And then what we need to do is, you see we've got these little yellow markers. These are called warp markers, and these lock themselves to the actual track. So for example, to give you a flavor of how they work, if I were to say lock one here, so we'll get our mouse right over it so it goes almost like an unfilled in warp marker. So it's a little bit of a gray color, double click. And then if we put another one over here, notice how as I'm now dragging these about, because the yellow things are fixed to the track, and as we drag it around, it's stretching the audio around it. And then depending on the warping algorithm, which we'll cover in the third video, Ableton will determine how to then process that audio. So the key thing to understand is as you move these around, it stretches the audio file around them. So we will undo that. So we will do Command Z. It's really worth learning that shortcut for undo. So by far the best way to warp things with a fixed or known BPM is to do the following. So first of all, we need to set the very first warp marker. So we'll zoom out, make sure that there's no other warp markers so we can have a look. There's no other yellow things, so the only warp markers at the beginning. So we get our very first one, and we need to put a warp marker right at the very first beat of the track or loop. So in this case, because it's a track, we will put it right here. And we see how Ableton's pretty much guessed that this is the start of the track. So we will hover our mouse over here so it looks like an unfilled in warp marker, double click, and that locks in that yellow warp marker. And then we need to get rid of this first one, so we will double click. And then what we need to do is we need to drag this first warp marker to 1 because it's the very first beat of our entire track. So we will simply click and drag, and it should lock itself in. And then we'll zoom out a little bit. And then here's the really key step. So a lot of people, what they do is they insert loads of warp markers and they keep stretching it and stretching it and stretching it as they go through the track to get it all to fit. But because we know there's tracks at fixed BPM, all we need to do is tell Ableton, this is the BPM of the track. Just warp it out appropriately. So we know this track is 140 BPM because I made it. So what we need to do is tell Ableton to warp out this audio file according to 140 BPM. So what we'll do, we'll click the first warp marker. So just do a single click, so we're selecting it, and then go to this seg BPM. This is the really key step. So we'll click it, type in 140, hit the enter key. And then now what it's done is it's written out the entire file according to that BPM. And then what we need to do now is to check to make sure that it's worked correctly. So what we'll do, we will find loads of drum transients. So you see these big peaks, these big transients, these are the drums, which will be in the case of this track, either a kick or a snare. We'll zoom in and make sure they are pretty much where they're supposed to be. So we'll zoom in and we see that that one there is right on a division 1.4, that looks correct. These look correct, so see that transient is on 3. We'll zoom out a lot further as well, so we will have a look at... So if we have a look, maybe say 129th bar, which would be the start of a new phrase, and we can see as we zoom in, it's exactly right. So see how this drum transient starts right at the start of the 129th bar, which is absolutely perfect. So we know that this track is exactly how we wanted. So for example, if we want to play it back at normal speed, because we know it's 140 BPM, we'll set the BPM of our project to be 140. We'll hit enter, and now it'll play back at normal speed. Then if we wanted to say drag up the tempo, we can make it faster. So you just drag it around and everything still happens on the grid in the right way, but we're just changing the BPM. And there you go, it works exactly the same for drum loops as well as it does for tracks. And that's going to be the secret to warping tracks with a fixed or known BPM. And it's worth noting as a bonus little tip, if you're not quite sure what the BPM of a track is, there's a few ways you can work it out. So you can either use something like Tractor or some DJ software to automatically analyze it and tell you the BPM, or you can get a BPM counter on your phone. That's something I do quite a lot myself. So all I have to do is, as the track's playing, just tap out the BPM and it'll give me approximately the BPM. And then what I can do, I can type in that approximate BPM and then just try all the numbers around it until the transients in the track line up with the grid, and I know I've got exactly the right BPM. But yeah, that's how to warp tracks or loops with a fixed or known BPM. It's worth checking out the Splice project if you want some more examples and to try some for yourself, or just try on your own track. Either way is good. And in the next video, we're going to have a look at pseudo warp markers a little bit and some cool shortcuts that will save you a lot of time. And in the video after that, we're going to have a look at warp modes, which are really, really important, which allows you to determine what algorithm Ableton uses to process your warping. But yeah, been Multiplier. Hope you enjoyed.